All right. Good morning or early afternoon, depending on where you're calling in from. I am so excited to welcome you all to today's B Corp Certification Readiness webinar, preparing for your B Corp review journey. I am Lindsay Wilson, Manager of Business Development at B Lab US and Canada. I use pronouns she and her, and I'm joining you all from Denver, Colorado, the homeland of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute peoples. So a little bit of housekeeping before I introduce the team who will be running the webinar today. There is a live caption option available to you if you need it, but you will need to manually enable it on your end. We invite your questions on the content throughout the entirety of the webinar, but please drop them in the Q&A box instead of in the chat. We'll have some time at the end of the webinar to answer questions live, and any that we don't get to, we will send out the answers in the follow-up to the event. So feel free at this time to use the chat to introduce yourselves and connect with one another, and the Q&A box to ask questions. I'm joined today by Carla Heim of the B Corp BDC, who is the Canadian national partner to B Lab US in Canada. And I am also joined by my colleague, Karen, who wears many hats at B Lab, but will be helping us with our tech and slides today, as well as my colleagues, Max and Carrie Ann, who are going to be helping out in the chat and with the Q&A. I'm also joined by you all who are calling in from all over the US and Canada. We are thrilled that you are on the B Corp journey and can't wait to welcome you into the B Corp community when that day comes. This webinar is intended for folks who are already on the journey to B Corp certification and is not a 101 session. So if you are brand new to B Corp, this content is likely not going to meet you where you are at. So I just want to be really clear about that before we dig in. Today's session is intended to give you the information and resources that you need to understand if you're ready to submit for the review and if you're prepared for that B Corp review process, which we'll dig into in a bit. So before we begin, we have a quick poll that we'd love for you to answer. And so Karen is going to help tee that up. It is pretty simple. Do you feel ready for B Corp certification? Yes, no, maybe not sure. And I would love to see your responses. Answers are rolling in. We'll wait a second to get the results. Karen, do we have our results?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. So it looks like 15% of you say yes, you're ready, 30% no, and then we have the majority in the maybe not sure camp. So we're going to ask you that question again at the end of our time together, keeping in mind that our goal for today is really to give you all of the knowledge and resources that you need to feel prepared. So next slide. So today we're going to cover the importance of being ready, the B Corp legal requirement, eligibility and B impact assessment track, score and impact business models, the review process, as well as a quick live demo of our B impact assessment. And we'll try to save about 5 minutes at the end to surface any kind of thematic questions that percolate during our time together. So B Lab was founded in 2007 and is the organization behind the B Corp standards and certification. And B Corp, next slide, Karen, is really about more than getting a seal of approval to using your branding. It's really about joining a global community of leaders, accelerating a culture shift to redefine success in business and build an inclusive, equitable, and regenerative economic system for all people and the planet. And in fact, by the end of 2025, our aim is that the B community in the US and Canada will have collectively scaled specific transformational business practices and public policies that systematically advance climate justice, racial equity, and a stakeholder-driven economic system. There are now over 4,000 B Corps in 77 countries and 150 industries all around the world. And here's just a small snapshot of the B Corp community here in the US and Canada. It's really the diversity of companies in the community that makes it compelling and resilient and accelerates the positive impact that companies can make collectively. It's also important to note here that while many of the companies that you see on the screen are likely larger in size, the vast majority of B Corps are small to medium-sized businesses making less than 5 million in annual revenue. So at this point, you might be wondering, what do B Corps need to do to actually get certified? All B Corps must meet 3 fundamental requirements for certification. And our hope is that these requirements be thought of as the foundational pillars of being a B Corp while also reinforcing your own impact journey. Every B Corp must get a verified score of at least 80 points on the B Impact assessment, adopt a legal framework to consider all stakeholders, and make their score transparent on the other end of the review and certification on the B Corp directory on our website. So as I said, today's session, it's not a 101. And so if you're just starting on the B Impact assessment, you'll want to review some materials on our website and go through that assessment to benchmark your score before and really dig in before you get to this part of the process. But we are going to zoom in on the highlighted sections of this roadmap on the screen to make sure that you really know what to expect and how to prepare in these stages of the process. All right. So in the past 14 years since B Lab was founded, we've seen just incredible growth in the global B Corp community with demand for our B Impact Assessment tool and B Corp certification surging in recent years, which is great for the movement of business as a force for good. That being said, in full transparency, next slide, yep, B Lab is having a hard time managing the growing demand with our current capacity and systems. And so we want to be really transparent with you in saying that the current reality is that there is a waiting period between when you will submit and when you'll actually be able to go through the review process with our team. And we'll dig into that process in a bit. But for now, it's important to note that the current waiting time from submission to the first stage of the review, which is called the evaluation, can take up to 10 months. So if you are in this session, it is likely that you have not submitted the assessment yet, and you may find this session helpful to understand if you're ready to submit and what you can expect once you do. So before I dig into some of kind of like the common snags with companies in the review process and maybe what leads to companies falling out of that review process and not certifying, I do want to say that the wait time at least is partially due to our capacity, like we said. And so we are working hard to decrease the waiting period because we know it's not ideal and can definitely be a momentum killer in your certification journey. And so I just want to make sure to kind of tell you all what we're working on in terms of our hiring and innovations to our processes that will hopefully lead to a decrease in that wait time in the coming months. So we're recruiting and training new B Lab employees. We're piloting a program right now to train some independent verifiers, and that's actually running, and we're starting to see some great results from it. We're also building more functionality within our B Impact Assessment tool itself, which is to give an estimated wait time in days, so you have more clarity around how long you might be waiting. And then if you are interested after this webinar in looking at a video from our CEO of the B Lab Global Standards Trust about this work, you're welcome to do so, and he can answer probably a lot of the questions that you have on your mind. Now, the other reason that I think and that we see leads to kind of a long review process is just that companies tend to submit their assessments or have been without being fully prepared to go through the review process. And so 60% of companies right now do not end up certifying after they submit. And companies are unsuccessful in the review for a variety of reasons that are listed here, which you can see no designated kind of B champion to lead in the process with some staff turnover, choosing the wrong track in the B Impact Assessment, which we'll cover, opting into incorrect or not applicable impact business models, which we will define and cover today, documentation, being unprepared at the time of submission or at the time of when you're waiting so that you're scrambling to pull that documentation during the review, the legal requirement not being understood or met, and unresponsiveness and communications breakdown. So we'll dig into a few of these today. The first thing I want to just quickly cover is the legal requirement for B Corp certification. So a key pillar of becoming a B Corp is adopting a legal structure that supports decision-making in the interest of all stakeholders of the company, not just shareholders. This requirement speaks to the longer-term systems change that the B community hopes to achieve, a system based on creating value for all stakeholders, like communities, the environment, and workers, alongside shareholders. So this is a system that creates value for the many versus the few. Every company pursuing B Corp certification must change their legal DNA to reflect this by either changing your articles of incorporation with the language found using the legal tool on our website that's linked in the slide here that I believe Carrie Ann or Karen is going to drop in the chat, or if you are currently registered as a corporate entity in a state or province where a benefit corporation is available, you must transition to benefit corporation status. We recommend you use that legal tool to understand what your specific requirement is based on where and how you're currently incorporated, and then speak to your counsel about the process for meeting it. For companies with less than 50 employees, this requirement actually needs to be met before certification is complete. And for companies with over 50 employees, there is a little bit of a grace period. The other thing I want to mention is that B Lab is now hosting legal requirement webinars so that we can really dig in on the why of the legal requirement and the how regarding your specific kind of structure. And so I think we're going to drop that link also in the chat, and it's linked here in the slide as well. There's one coming up actually next week for Canadian companies, and one in, I believe, the first week of December coming up for companies that are corporate entities in terms of transitioning to public benefit corporation status. And so happy for you all to join that as a supplement to this one. Next slide. I think I'm going to pass it over to Carla now for the next couple of sections.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. I'm Carla Heim, Senior Advisor of Sustainability and ESG from BDC. And as Lindsay mentioned, I am the lead on our partnership with BDC, and we help lead the movement in Canada. And I see here that there are several people joining from Canada, so that's always really nice to see. I want to acknowledge that the land in which I live is the unceded territory of the Syilx Okanagan people in Canada. So for eligibility and track, this can be an area of confusion for entrepreneurs that are in the process and establishing their B Corp B Impact Assessment. So let's just go over a couple of the items. So for certification eligibility, you have to be a for-profit entity to certify. You can be a parent company with all wholly and majority owned subsidiaries. You can have subsidiaries of a parent that does not share the same legal name, logo, website, operation, and geolocation. You can be a franchisor and majority owned franchise. You can be a franchisee who franchisor is certified, and you can be an affiliated entity. So same name, different geolocation. Who cannot certify are company divisions or just a department, a company brand, government-owned businesses, or companies with less than 12 months of operation, or a non-profit. So that's who cannot certify through this process. So one of the really big things to understand is you have to understand who you're certifying. And certainly if you only have one company, that's a fairly straightforward thing to decide. However, a lot of companies have a operating company and perhaps a holding company, for example. And in that situation, you'd probably be certifying your operating company. There's also situations where you have many different companies, maybe companies with lots of different subsidiaries. And so when it becomes a complicated organizational structure, we really recommend that you have a scoping exercise with our group at B Lab. You can actually email at certify@bcorporation.net for assistance on this, simply because in some instances, you may be completing several different assessments for the different companies that you might be wanting to certify, and it might be a complicated process to get there. So in this instance, it's really important to know this up front on your journey and understand what you have to do in order to get ready for certification. The other thing that you need to determine is your size, your sector, and your location. So when it comes to the size of the organization, the tool uses how many employees do you have. So some simple rules of thumb, if you are a fairly new company and you just have two shareholders that are working in the business, you technically have 0 employees. If you are a company that has two shareholders and a one full-time employee, then you would have 1 employee. Also, there's different algorithms to figure out how many employees you have based on full-time and part-time positions. For example, if you have 5 full-time positions and or pardon me, you have 5 employees, 3 are full-time and 2 are part-time, you would have 4 employees. This is really important to help structure the questions that are given to you as an organization. There is a job aid that helps you actually determine how many employees that you do have. I think it's just been popped into into the chat. And when we go into the live demonstration, we will also show you how to find it there as well. So the next section is to determine your sector. So with the sector information, it is important to understand that there are 5 different sectors, and then from there you will pick your industry. So starting off with services with minor environmental footprint. So these are service companies that don't have a huge environmental footprint, like maybe a law office or an accounting firm or a consulting organization. So simply they probably lease some space and they have a very minimal environmental footprint. Services with a significant environmental footprint will have, say, an office or another service that has, a fairly big environmental footprint. Now, these operations might be something like a hotel or a landscaping company, for example. Now, the wholesale retail sector is when you actually, as a company, manufacture more than 10% of your goods. So this it was when you would actually choose the wholesale retail section. Pardon me, I'm going to go back on that. That's the manufacturing stream. I completely apologize. I was a bit on autopilot there. Your manufacturing is when you actually manufacture more than 10% of your products. If you actually don't manufacture, but you're purchasing from other manufacturing companies, that's when you would be a wholesale retail company. And again, you likely you have products that you're selling in these 2 streams. So the agricultural grower stream are for farms and those types of practices where the primary is that you're actually a grower, either selling your products yourself or actually selling them to others. The only area that does not go under agriculture and growers is if you have livestock. Livestock would be under the manufacturing sector. The next thing to consider is where are you located? It might be default to think, well, I'm incorporated in Canada, so I'm going to say that the country I'm operating from is Canada. But there is a slight variant there. If the majority of your employees are not based in the company where you're incorporated, then you would actually choose the company where the majority of your employees actually are. So that's really important to understand when you do choose your country. So the next section we're going to take a look at is score and impact business models. So with your score, as we mentioned, you do have to be over 80 in order to certify as a B Corp. When you submit for your review, you're going to have a third party review all of your policies, your procedures, and make sure that what you say is actually happening. And during this process, it is common to go up and down in your score. So we often recommend that you're at least 85 before you submit. That gives you a little bit of wiggle room during the process should your score or should some of the questions lose a few points. Um, in this process, if you do fall below the 80 mark, you will be put into revision and you won't have that much time to increase. So going in with a few more points is always recommended. So what does the impact tool actually measure? When you actually enter into it, there are 5 key impact areas. So there's governance, workers, environment, community, and customers. Under these 5 key impact areas, there are 4 kinds of questions that you'll encounter. The first are gating questions. They generally have no points, and they're really just getting to know your organization better. As you answer the gating questions, new sections of the impact assessment will open up for you. The next type of questions are operational questions. These are things that you do day to day in your practices. The third type are impact business model questions. These are very intentional business models and are slightly different from operational questions. The final area are disclosures. So again, these have no points, but they help the standards team understand you as an organization and anything else that you might have going on. So the impact business models are, as I mentioned before, very intensive, intentional impact business models that create significant impact. And so it's important to understand the difference here because these are actually really hard to achieve. They're not, there's a few rule of thumbs that we'll go through when we're talking about these different impact business models that will help you identify whether or not you truly have one or not. So we can go to the next slide because this might help actually frame the context. So, and if you're doing recycling, pardon me, your operations, you're recycling your waste, that would be an operational type question. Do you recycle? If you have an impact business model, you will actually be selling recycling services or technology. So that's quite different in terms of the impact that you're having. If you have donations under operations, you might donate from time to charity or provide some pro bono services. But if you have a very intentional impact business model, you have set a high percentage of returns and on perhaps donations baked into your business model. So these types of systems will be very visible on your website. You will report on the impact that you're having, and you'll have a real clear idea of the percentage of revenue or time that you're actually giving on an annual basis. So it's quite different from an operational question around donating. Under hiring, you might have a diverse workforce under your operational questions, but having a very intentional workforce development program that targets individuals with barriers to employment would be the impact business model. And you'd actually be very intentional with this particular impact business model where you're reporting the outcomes and the positive outcomes that you're actually having. So there are many different impact business models. Some are only applicable to underdeveloped countries, and they're in each bucket area because obviously we can have influence. So when you're going through those gating questions that I mentioned, you'll be answering questions that will open up potential impact business models to you. Generally, impact business models will actually have scores between about 10 to actually even 60 points. So it's very unlikely that you'll have more than 1 to 2 impact business model. So one thing to keep in mind is if all of a sudden you have, say, 4 or 5 impact business models that open up to you based on the way you're answering questions, Once you go through the answering the questions of the impact business model, if your score is below, say, 2 points, that might indicate that you actually don't have that impact business model. And certainly, if you're scoring maybe more than, say, 60 to 100 points in the impact business models that you've chosen, you might want to revisit that to make sure that you're answering those questions accurately and correctly, because there are instances where you perhaps are double counting your impact. So that's something to really keep in mind. There is, however, one impact business model that everyone should achieve if you become a B Corp certified company, and that is mission lock. So most of you that will have changed your articles of incorporation to embed the impact into your business, you will receive 10 points for mission lock. And so this is one that is a given for almost every organization because it's a requirement to certification. One other thing that's really important to understand is that if you are saying that you have an impact business model, the standards team is going to ask for quite a bit of documentation to support that impact business model. So be prepared to back up your impact business model. There are instances where you've stated a claim that you're actually going to have an impact. So you've created an impact business model for your company, but you may not have the data just yet to support that impact. So it is important to really understand how you can report. So sometimes it might be too early to report on an impact that you might have. So really ask the question, are you ready to report on the impact that you're having? As I mentioned before, there are instances where double counting may occur, and we can go to the next slide. So, one of the examples that we give, if your company's mission is focused on local economic development, but one of the services you offer is a financial literacy program, then you can receive both local economic development and education IBM only if you can separate the revenue from the course offered. So sometimes, if you are basing your impact based on the revenues that are allocated, that's an indication that you may be double counting if you're allocating the same revenue to two impact business models as well. So there's quite a bit of information embedded into the B impact assessment. And when we go into the live assessment, I'll show you some areas that you can investigate when you actually are answering the questions that will be helpful when tackling the impact business model piece. So I'm going to pass it back to Lindsay for the review process.
Great. Thanks, Carla. So as Carla said, we're going to dig into the review process now. And before we do, I just want to make sure to emphasize the fact that it is common for companies to spend many months or even years working toward achieving a self-reported score of 80 points or higher in order to simply become eligible to submit their assessment for review. And while there are around 4,000 certified B Corps globally, there are over 100,000 users of the B Impact assessment. And so, it's a tool designed for you to use to measure and manage your impact, regardless of if you're ready for certification at this very time. But if you are, the review process is central to the B Corp certification and community. It is our process to ensure that B Corps are stewards in creating positive impact and meet the highest standards of social and environmental performance. So before the review, your company's score reflects a self-reported and unverified score. And our goal for the process is to learn more about your business and to arrive at a verified score that applies the standards according to both their intent and consistently across the B Corp community. So this slide, it's a bit busy, but here is what the B Corp review process looks like to give you clarity on the exact stages and timelines once you submit. These are all the stages of the review that occur. So you will submit your assessment, pay the submission fee, be placed in the evaluation queue where you could wait for up to 10 months for our team to take you through an evaluation. I should note here that we do have evaluation analysts that take you through those evaluations. One of them is helping out in the chat, Max Hayes, and so you might be working with him through that process. If you get through, you'll move on to the verification queue, where we will require you to upload documents. So after you are through the evaluation, make sure that you are keeping tabs on the tasks in your review, because you will be held in that verification queue until you upload those documents to our assessment portal to our team. Then when capacity opens up for verification, you will move on to that verification process, in which you will be assigned to another member of our team to work with individually to go through the entirety of your assessment. If you get through verification with a score of 80 or higher, you can certify as a B Corp after signing the term sheet and paying your first year's certification fee. If your score drops below 80, you can work on an improvement plan using some resources linked here on this slide that I highly recommend to get your score in a good position to resubmit when you are ready. These are also great resources to look at, before you submit, just to make sure you are prepared. So next slide. You'll notice in the previous slide, we didn't include the exact timelines and deadlines for the different stages. This is because those timelines and deadlines do depend on what review approach gets assigned to your company when you submit. So linked here is a decision tree that we can also drop in the chat that will help you identify which approach will likely be assigned to you at the time of submission, so you can get a general idea of the timeline. And then once you do submit, you can reference which review approach you are on from your B Impact Assessment portal, and then use these articles linked here, the micro enterprise, small, medium enterprise approach to understand your exact process. So at this point, you might be wondering, okay, well, I have all this information. When should I submit? These 4 items that we've covered, to some extent today, are really critical to consider to understand your own readiness to submit your assessment. We do recommend that you try for at least 85 points before submitting your assessment, because it is very common for your score to fluctuate in the review process. The second thing to ask yourself is whether you feel confident backing up your score with documentation. I highly recommend checking out these 2 articles linked that will give you tips on how to prepare your general documentation, and then that documentation for your impact business models that Carla talked about. The other thing to ask yourself is, does your team currently have capacity to go through the review process? It is a rigorous process that does take time, and a designated project manager on your team, and maintaining consistency in who that person is and leading the company through that process is really important. And lastly, and importantly, is your team clear on your legal requirement, the transparency requirement, and have you reviewed the fee structure, and are you comfortable with that? If you clear all of those boxes, I think you're ready to submit your assessment for review. And so next slide, you're able to reference this slide, and again, more links on this slide for directions on how to actually submit your assessment when you're ready. When you do submit, next slide here, the review team will communicate with the key contact listed through a review section that will pop up in your B Impact Assessment portal that Carla is actually gonna take you through. And so I'm going to turn it back to Carla to kind of show you where those tasks live, and also some features that will help you now and throughout the process.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. I will share my screen now. All right, so hopefully everyone can see that. So this is what the B impact assessment looks like, and hopefully most of you are very familiar with this already. But there are some key areas that I like to showcase in case you haven't actually explored some of the benefits of the B impact assessment. It is a very robust tool with tons of tools and information and helpful areas that are quite often missed. I will talk to folks that have gone through the entire assessment and, for example, have never accessed the knowledge base or don't realize that they can do a couple things. So that's why we do spend some time on the live demo. So I spend a lot of time in the question filter. The question filter is an area where you can kind of do everything from. Across the top, you will notice that the document all is a feature that will happen during your review process. This will not appear unless you've actually submitted your assessment, but it's one way to find out exactly what documents the standards team are requesting from you. You can also print a PDF of your entire assessment, which can be quite helpful to have a snapshot of how you answered your questions and to share with other team members. You can also download the assessment into an Excel spreadsheet. I personally find this extremely helpful. At BDC, we're a certified B Corp and we're a very large organization. So I use this feature to download the actual assessment questions, the potential answers, and exactly what we have answered to share with other teams so that they can work on those questions and prepare the documentation and everything they need to support the answers. So I do find this particular option extremely helpful because I don't give everybody at BDC access to the actual B impact assessment. I find this method works a little bit better in working with larger teams. The filter is also very important. The filter is an area where you can actually take a look at the different types of questions. So if you just want to look at your impact business model questions, you can click on that and you'll just see the impact business model questions or the gating questions, etc. The other area I want to show you is the attribute section. This section actually will filter out, those that have marked for discussion or marked for documentation when the standards team is actually communicating with you. It will also show you if you have any affirmative disclosure questions. One thing to keep in mind, if you do have an affirmative disclosure question, you will be asked for supporting documentation on that affirmative disclosure question. So something to keep in mind and prepare for while you go through the certification process. You can also filter the questions that you've answered and the questions that you haven't answered. Oddly enough, during the review process, sometimes the assessments will come in and not all questions will be answered. So if you haven't answered every single question, that's something that the review team is going to come back to you with. So just do a quick check just to make sure that you've actually answered every question in the assessment. You can also filter based on questions that you've bookmarked and ones that you've actually added notes to. So this area can be quite helpful when you're navigating through the big assessment because it is quite detailed in manner. So let's take a look at our actual questions. Here is an example of a question. One of the areas that I really recommend that most folks do when they're answering the questions is to read the questions, but then also read the learn more. The Learn More provides you with explanations, sometimes actually practical advice or examples, and it gives you some context around the question and sort of what B Lab is expecting in terms of an answer. And so this can be really helpful in scoping the question out. And like I mentioned before, there are times where I know a lot of folks haven't even actually clicked on the Learn More, and that's a missed opportunity to really make sure that you're answering that question really well. For those of you that haven't used the set a goal, the star in the corner, you can click on that and actually set a goal for yourself to improve. You can give yourself a timeline and also receive email reminders. So if you haven't used that, this is a really good option to use if you're using the assessment as a planning or a strategy tool. Also, as you go through the questions, it might be helpful to bookmark. So simply click the bookmark option to those questions that you need to come back to. Maybe you need to fine tune the documentation or you need to come back to that question. It's important to do that so that you can navigate the ones that you need to come back to. Again, this is just a really good practice to properly navigate through the assessment and make sure you don't miss anything. So the next area I want to show you is the Get Help button. It's located on every single screen that you will encounter when you're in the B Impact assessment, even when you first create your account. This blue Get Help button, which is always located in the lower right-hand section, is available to you as a huge knowledge base resource for you. In the knowledge base, you can actually Google any question that you might have. I shouldn't use Google, but search. Search for any question that you might have. So for example, if you're creating your assessment and you're not sure how to determine, how many employees you have, you can simply enter number of employees and click search, and it will actually come up with 10 articles of assistance. The first one being calculating your full-time equivalency. If you click on this particular article, it will actually give you a full explanation on exactly how to do this. There's also a little square with an arrow where you can actually click on that and it will pull up the full reference document and you can actually print it. It will also suggest to you related articles that might also be helpful. If we click on the Home button, this will bring you to the entire knowledge base. So if you're not sure what to search for and you just want to review what kind of information is located in the knowledge base, you can simply do that for going through everything. There is so much information here, helpful tools and tips that, I would highly recommend if you haven't explored this, definitely explore it because it will answer a lot of questions that you might have. This is where you can also contact B Lab if you have specific questions or you can't make certain changes that you're trying to do. You can actually create a ticket here, and then you can actually watch for these tickets as well through ticket status. I do recommend being patient when you do submit a ticket. Sometimes it can take up to a week to get back to you, but definitely B Lab watches this very regularly and they will get back to you with answers for you. So taking a look back at the assessment, there are some areas that during your assessment are really important to make sure that you have completed. The first area is the company details. This must be completed when you submit. So please don't miss this and provide lots of information here because your standards team is going to use this to really get to know you better. We've mentioned a couple times how important it is to have your team members properly listed within the B Impact assessment. This is how B Lab will communicate with you. So in this instance, we've got Patty as a user, and she has her notifications enabled. That means that when the standards team communicates with you and they they actually add anything to the B Impact assessment or try to contact you, you will actually receive these notifications. If you have notifications disabled, you will not get any of this information, as well as if you've had a team member complete the assessment and then perhaps they leave the organization, sometimes companies forget to update this information. So the employer will be gone, the email address will be inactive, and you will not hear back from the standards team. So really keep that in mind to keep this very up to date with your correct team members. The next area we're going to show you is notifications. This is where you will see if the B Lab is actually asking you questions, asking you for documentation. This is where this information will actually go. So it's always a good idea to just double check your notifications. It should be in red if there are notifications for you, but it's always a good idea, just best practice to double check if there are any notifications for you. The next section is the review section. This will actually be created once you submit. It will give you the information on your approach, where you're at in the stage. You can see here that we're in the verification queue. It will also list your analysts that are assigned to you as you go through. The other things that will actually be here can be seen when you click on view. It will give you a summary of where you're at, what's happening, any review notes that the B Lab team wants to share with you. It'll show you exactly where you are in the process. So it's a good way to keep track of what's happening. And definitely an area that you want to double check periodically just to make sure you're not missing anything. So there are a couple other areas just to final that I just wanted to review if you've never looked at this before. The improvement report can be helpful if you're hovering around the 80 mark and you want to actually look for how to improve your score. This will provide both the goals that you set yourself, and also the system will populate areas that they think maybe you could have an improvement on. So it's just always a good idea to take a look at your improvement report to see if there are opportunities to increase your score before you submit. And so that is my overview of the live demonstration. Hopefully you've learned something new. The one other thing that I will show you under the B Corp certification website, it's always a good idea to take a look at this area under certification, and I'll direct you to the resource library where we actually have the B Corp certification readiness resources and webinar located. So if you ever want to reference back to this, you can do that. And there's some great tools under this particular bundle. And there's also other featured resources that you can access here as well. So if you haven't looked at this before, I would highly recommend checking it out. And so that's everything from me. I will stop sharing my screen now.
Great. Thanks, Carla. And I think, Karen, we're going back to just a couple of slides before we open the room out for some live questions. So I want to make sure to direct your attention, going off of what Carla just showed you in the resource library. We've highlighted some that we think will be the most useful for you. And so if you're looking for resources on making the case for certification internally, or talking about the values of certification, talking about the case for adopting benefit governance, that board playbook, the fourth bullet point down there is a great one. You can also look up kind of the work of the B Corp community regarding climate justice and anti-racism, which we definitely recommend you do before you completely certify. And then you'll see a link here to the knowledge base that Carla ran through as well. And so next slide, I also want to just include a couple of links to connect to the B Corp community, maybe before you're a B Corp. So Be the Change is a great Medium platform. Stories of the B Corp community, if you're looking for some inspiration with your morning cup of coffee, that's a great one. We have some B Corp anti-racism resources available on our website, information about the B Corp Climate Collective. There's really a lot to dig into, so you can see kind of what's waiting for you on the other end of certification. And before I open up the room for some questions, I also want to just mention that B Lab is committed to creating an inclusive economy that works for all. And we do know that minority entrepreneurs have been historically and systematically excluded from the shared and durable prosperity of all that all people deserve. And so we do provide an equity discount in the hopes of making the B Corp movement more accessible to entrepreneurs that belong to continually oppressed communities. And so Carrie Ann is going to drop the link of who qualifies for that equity discount. It's 40% off of certification fees for your initial term. And so I wanted to make sure just to mention that before we open up the room for some questions. So I'm looking at the Q&A here to see if there are any maybe that have surfaced thematically, maybe Carrie Ann or Max who've been in the Q&A. Is there anything that we haven't answered? I'm interested in more info regarding the board requirements. Is there a link that speaks more to this? I would highly recommend you attend our legal webinar to learn a little bit more about that and open that board playbook that is linked. We have how much is the certification fee here. So I don't know if someone in the chat can drop the page to our certification page on our website, but that actually has the fee structure listed. It's a sliding scale based on your previous year's annual revenue. The recertification term is every 3 years, though you do pay a certification fee every year. So are there any others that we're seeing here? Maybe Karen, if you see any. I think one that came up that I think would be worth sharing about is it looks like we have someone asking about our company's pre-revenue, working on R&D while developing business opportunities. It looks like, are we still eligible for certification? So Max did answer this correctly, but just want to make sure everyone sees it. You do not need revenue to begin your certification journey, but you do need at least 12 months of business operations. And he included the link there to how we define business operations. If you have under 12 months of business operations, we offer a pending B Corp certification for startups. And for that certification, you need to complete the legal requirement, but you do not need to go through the B Corp review process. You take a preliminary B impact assessment and submit it to our team, noting that you're submitting for pending B status. Looks like we're getting more as we go here. I need help working through the process. Have been through it once and scored too low. I think I missed a lot of points due to confusion. Yeah. Peter, please reach out to certify@bcorporation.net and we can provide you with some support and some resources to help. And Carla, I don't know if you see anything that seems worth answering here you want to raise.
Yeah, I just noted that if anybody is in Canada, we do have something called the Getting to 80 program, which is a 6-day cohort that takes you through the entire assessment and does some design thinking for you as well to really build out your impact business models. So we do have that as a program, but it is only available to those in Canada. But, you know, it can be a journey, and I think we should really stress that, you know, we know that a lot of companies are really interested in reporting on their environment, social, and governance, and it can be a long journey. So be patient with yourself and the process, and definitely ask questions. We are always here to support and do what we can to make this process a little easier. But for anybody on the phone that has submitted, bravo. It's a big step. So we're really excited that you're a part of the process. And don't wait or hesitate to be a part of this community. Definitely engage. It's a brilliant global community. So you know, it's a very welcoming community as well. So that's the one thing I would like to leave everybody with, is to think about that.
Might have time for maybe 1 or 2 more live questions, or else I can close us out. So I'll give you all a minute.
Lindsay, we may want to clarify, there was a question about submitting documentation in French. Is that something that they would need to select in the beginning or at the end, what language they want?
Yeah, Carla, you look like you're nodding your head. Do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, for sure. When you create your assessment, there is the option to have a French assessment, and you're perfectly welcome to submit your documentation in French as well. Some of the resources aren't available in French, but you can definitely communicate with B Lab in French.
Yep, and that goes for a bunch of the other major languages as well. If anyone else is on the call and needs that, please let us know. Okay. Well, just so you all know, any questions that weren't answered, I think we covered them all. We're going to be sending out the questions and the responses to those questions in the Q&A along with this recording. With that, I'm going to close us out. Feel free to send any questions that you might have about the material today to certify@bcorporation.net. There's a human behind that email. It is Carrie Ann Reeves, who is here with us today. And so she'll be happy to support you if you reach out. And just thank you all for taking the time out of your day to learn more about B Corp. We really look forward to continuing our work together and have a great rest of your day. So goodbye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.